Hi all, it's PJ with Montevilla Sewing Centers. This is Household Sewing Machine Needles Part 2. Specialty needles, packaging, and storage. Specialty needles. So there are double and triple needles, and you can see from this image there is one shank and then multiple needles. On most modern sewing machines and or embroidery machines, there will be a little icon that you can engage when you insert a double or a triple needle. And what that does is it will tell your machine, hey, I have something other than a standard single needle in here. I need to confine the width of my stitches. And that's to safeguard against you breaking a needle. So on the left, I have just some sample stitches using the double needle. You can do some really, really fun things as far as decorations with those. A lot of times, when you engage the double needle function on your machine, oftentimes it will not allow you to do certain stitches, mainly because they're going to end up being too wide. One of my favorite things to use a double needle for is just on a straight stitch. Double needles come in all different types of tips and points. My favorite is the ball point, and this is a really good solution if you're trying to do what I would consider a mock cover stitch. The middle example shows just a straight stitch. So you've got 2 threads in your needle and you still have only 1 bobbin. And what will happen is that the bobbin thread will basically go back and forth between those 2 needle threads. So it becomes kind of a mock cover stitch. So if you don't happen to have a cover stitch machine and you need to hem a t-shirt, a ballpoint double needle will do the trick. The triple needles are great for decorative stitching, and the little image sample on the right at the top, it's just a straight stitch and then just a simple zigzag. And usually when I do a triple needle, I'll use embroidery thread over apparel thread because it's a little finer and you don't have a whole lot of room in there to work. So those are very fun needles for decorative sewing or for doing hems. Then there's also an embroidery spring needle. This can be used without a presser foot, and this kind of hops. A lot of people like to use this when they're doing free motion quilting. And then the quick threading needle, you can see right here, there's a little break in it, and you basically make a loop of thread and drag it down the blade, and it kind of just falls into the eye so that you don't actually have to thread it. The only experience that I've ever had with those was on a serger, and it kept coming in threaded, and I don't know if that's because of the serger action or because of the needle. So just a heads up on that. This is one of my favorite specialty needles, the wing needle or hem stitch. This is what the needle looks like, and it really does look like that with the big wings. And then on the right is a little sample of a stitch that was done with the wing needle. On your sewing machine, in your fancy stitches, the stitches that are bold, those are the ones that will work well with the hem stitch needle. And here's a couple tips when you're working with a hem stitch needle. You want to do your hem stitch on a natural fiber fabric, so either cotton or linen generally. And the thread that you want to use a really, really fine thread. So 60 or a 80 weight. And the reason you want to use the stitches that are in bold is that you want the needle to go in and out of the same hole multiple times. And that's what creates that hole. If you were to use heavy thread, it would just fill up that hole. And if you were to use a synthetic fabric, it would want to try to close up that hole. The natural fiber will kind of stay where you put it. So there's tons and tons of stitches that you can do with the hem stitch needle. This is another fun specialty needle, the double-eyed needle. It's just a single shaft needle, but you can put 2 threads in. And in this sample, so on the right-hand side, that's just a straight stitch, but you can see it's got the 2 different threads. And this was just a standard construction weight thread. And then the sample on the left side was one of the fancy stitches, and you can see the 2 different colors. I chose pretty opposing colors so that you could see it. But if you were to use, say, like maybe a tan and a light brown, you would get some really fun shading. Oftentimes this is used for people that do free motion embroidery, and you can use this for doing like animal hair or fur to get that subtle shading. Serger needles. I am familiar with the Baby Lock sergers, so if you have a brand of serger other than a Baby Lock, look at your owner's manual and it's going to tell you exactly which needle you should be using. On the Baby Lock sergers take standard household needles. Here's the one little caveat. If you are an owner of an 8-thread machine or a cover stitch machine, you should use the EL 705s. And the reason for this is that there is a scarf not only in the back but in the front that allows the loopers to get closer, and you will get a better secure stitch and you will have fewer skip stitches. However, if you're not doing a chain or a cover, you can use just a standard household needle. The EL 705s come 3 different ways. Just a standard EL 705. There's a EL 705 CF, which the CF stands for chrome finish. And then there's a EL 705 SUK CF. The SUK is a medium ballpoint. So if you're going to be serging on knits, that's the one that you want. The EL 705 SUK CF. I know that's kind of a mouthful, but that SUK is the important part. That's it on serger needles. When to change your needle. If you had a really strong microscope, after about 8 hours, this is basically what your needle would look like. So the age-old rule of thumb of changing your needle every 8 hours, that's still an extremely valid number of hours for changing your needle. Replacing your needle regularly is the easiest way to keep your stitches looking good and keeping a nice seam quality. If you have a worn or damaged needle, you could end up with frayed or broken thread. You could have skip stitches. Your seams could be puckering. You could be damaging your fabric. And if you really pay attention to your machine, you'll hear when your needle gets dull because it will kind of pop or clunk. It honestly and truly does make a different sound. 8 hours. Here's what's important to know about that 8 hours. 8 hours of the needle going up and down. If you sew apparel and you are, quote, sewing for 8 hours, the chances of your machine actually running that 8 hours, pretty slim. You're cutting, you're pinning, you're draping, you're fitting. You're doing a lot of other things while you're sewing other than sitting at your sewing machine and the needle going up and down. So keep that in mind. Now, embroidery. When you're embroidering, if you say, quote, I'm going to go embroider for 8 hours, chances are good your machine could be running 6 or 7 of those 8 hours. I've been known to have an embroidery machine running when I'm not even in the house. Just keep that in mind. 8 hours is still 8 hours, but 8 hours of embroidering is going to be a different 8 hours than it is of sewing. Needle surfaces or coatings. Sewing machine needles are made out of hardened steel wire. Most sewing machine needles have a nickel surface. Some needles have a chrome surface, and chrome is 2 times more durable than nickel. There are also machine needles that have a titanium surface, And that's 2.5 times more durable than chrome, or basically 4 times more durable than the nickel surface. So that you would want to take into account with your 8 hours. Honestly, if you're at all in question, change your needle. It's the least expensive way to keep your machine running correctly and having it run the way you would expect it to run. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier. So the NIP PTFE is a non-stick coating, and on the Schmetz Super Universal, it's specifically called out that this is the non-stick coating that they use. On the anti-glue needles from Classe, they just say that it's a non-stick coating. So I don't actually know that it's this exact coating, but I'm going to guess it's something very similar. So just know that. And in the fine print is all of the complete description. The important part, it's non-stick and it is designed to work with tacky adhesive stabilizers. Needle packaging. Up here on the left, I have a little image of this Schmetz needle package, and almost all of the needle manufacturers now are color coding their needles. Classe color codes with the type of needle, but unfortunately not the size. Most of the other brands will have the size and the type of the needle. Inspirus may only have the type of needle. Schmetz makes the Floriani chrome needles, and they have listed both the needle type and the needle size. On the package, it's going to have the needle designation, meaning what kind of a needle it is, and in this instance, it's a stretch needle. Below that, it's the needle system. Basically, what you need to know about needle systems is that a 130/705 is a household needle. The 130 is the length of the needle. 705 means it's a flat shank. The H means it's the scarf. And then on that example, the S stands for stretch. The one below that, the universal, the CF, that stands for chrome finish. And then in the Inspira needle, the J is denim or jeans needle. This is a little tutorial on how to open needle packages. These are the common brands that we sell at Montavilla. And generally speaking, most of the packages that are this style all open the same way. Just pull it off of the card. And then this top part slides. It just slides back. And then the back side flips down. The Floriani Schmetz, same thing. It just slides down. That tips back. And then this slides back up. The Schmetz, the same packaging. Same thing. Okay, then the Classes, this is their new packaging, and I can honestly say I really like it. One of the things that they've added is everything is color-coded now so that the shank matches the labeling. So these are top stitch, these are quilting is green. The anti-glue is, the label is pink, but the needles themselves are a dark color. So here's how to open these. Basically, this just bends back, and there's little arrows here, and then this whole thing opens out. But the top of this bends back as well. And you can see here the anti-glue needles, they're a darker color. It's because of the coating that's on them. It is, in essence, a Teflon coating to keep these from sticking. So these were designed specifically to use with the tacky stabilizers. And they do make a difference. So just break the top back and then open out. And they snap shut. So they're all very nice and secure. Okay. That's how to open a needle package. Storing your needles. Once you take your needle out of the package, you should not return it to the package. This way you always know that if you're taking a needle from the package, it is in fact a brand new needle. You don't have to worry if it's been used before or how long it's been used. My pad for needles, I think, is a great little notion. It's about a half an inch of really sturdy felt, and it's got the majority of all the needle sizes printed right on it, so it's really easy. You don't have to mess with anything. And in essence, what you can do is put your gently used needles into the needle pad with its little marking. If for some reason your needle is not on there, there's a little space down on the right hand side to put those. The little flower pin is to help you know what needle is in what machine. Although if you have multiple machines, you might want to mark on your little flower head which machine that is, just to help you keep track of what's what. Here's a little tip that I use if I happen to have one of the older needles and I don't know what it is. I have an iPhone, and I'll use the camera function and zoom in on it, and usually I can figure out what it is. On the old Class A needles in the package, there was a numbering system for what type of point it was. So hang on to that if you've still got some of those older needles. That'll help you figure out what's what. When setting up this video, it occurred to me that I had a lot of needles that were not color coded, but with some office supplies, I decided that I could color code my own needles. So I have a package of Sharpie markers. I use the Schmetz color coding system mainly because it's got the type of needle and the size. I just printed out their color code chart, and then with my Sharpie markers, I just made a little mark with the color of Sharpie marker I was going to use next to their color coding because they didn't quite all match up. And then I simply colored my needle, and it has worked out so far. So little tip for you if you have needles that are not color coded. In the video description below, there will be a link to the needles and thread reference list. This has a ton of links on it for all kinds of useful information from the needle companies and also the thread companies. It's a great source of information.